Hi. So in chapter 10, we're going to test about a population parameter, but instead of just one sample, we're going to be testing about two parameters. And you can just think of things like Sprint versus like Verizon. And lately there's been some ads about how Sprint is just as good or 1% difference. And so when they advertise those things, they can't do false advertising. So there's had to been some sort of like statistical testing to be able to compare the data to see that there was a 1% difference. That's comparing two entirely different distributions, right? The distribution from Verizon users and Sprint users. Um, that's what chapter 10 is about. You can think of the commercials with Proactive, where they interview celebrities and just um, non-celebrity people, and they say, "Oh, look at their face before." We gave them Proactive, and look at their face after, and look how clear it is. That's also two sample testing because they're testing what the subjects had before they did a treatment, they applied a treatment to the subjects, and then they reviewed the subjects after the treatment was applied. So the first sample would be the before sample, and the second sample is the after, and what does that look like. However, the subjects in each sample are the same. And those are the two different situations we're going to deal with. The Sprint and Verizon, most likely if you have Verizon as your cell phone provider, you wouldn't have Sprint at the same time, right? It's one phone has one provider. Therefore, those would be independent samples. However, with before and after, where the subjects of each sample were the same, with before and then applied a treatment and then after, that's called dependent sampling. So when you're comparing two samples, there are the two situations where you're going to have either independent sampling, which is really nice, right? And dependent sampling, which we kind of have to deal with because it is dependent sampling, and so we're going to have a different technique for that. And so that would be the chapter 10 that we're going to do. So let's go ahead and start. So independent sampling methods means that when you have individuals selected for one sample, do not dictate which individuals are in the second sample. However, with dependent sampling, the individuals selected to be in one sample are determined to determine the individuals in the second sample. So you can look at this as the independent is that Sprint, dependent is that Proactive. And dependent sampling is usually called matched pairs, and that's going to be in our last section in this chapter. So it just usually means like individuals to be matched against him or herself. So if a student in the beginning of the semester predicts their grade, and then we give them the treatment, which is like maybe tutoring and some SI, and then we see what their final exam grade is or their course grade. So it's just usually match pairs means like they are dependent on each other. So essentially maybe before and after is the most common one. If the subjects are in the same or in the second sample are the same in the first sample. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some examples, independent or dependent. So a researcher wants to know the price of a one night stay at Holiday Inn Express is less than the price of one night stay at Red Roof Inn. The researcher randomly selects 8 towns where the location of the hotels is close to each other and determines the price of a one night stay. So we need to think about this and use some common knowledge. So if two hotels are pretty close to each other, do they compete in prices? Like, do they see that, oh, that one's giving $99 a night, I'm charging $200 a night. Maybe I can compete and make mine a little lower as well. So competing prices is common in marketing, right? So if a price of a one night stay at Holiday Inn is less than a price at Red Roof Inn, if I select 8 different towns with these hotels, would those samples be dependent or independent? Well, I would say that they're dependent because I know for a fact that hotels compete in prices and they do price matching, right? So here we would say that the samples are dependent, right? And with pricing, because whatever the one has, the other one also has. And also because they compete in prices. Okay, and so the next one is a researcher wants to know whether the state quarters that were introduced in 1999 have a mean weight that is different from traditional quarters. A researcher randomly selects 18 state quarters and 16 traditional quarters and compare their weights. So we ask ourselves, are the subjects in the first sample the same in the second sample? Are the two samples independent? Are state quarters the same as a traditional quarter? Is a traditional quarter a state quarter? And the answer is no, right? If it's a state quarter, then it cannot be a traditional quarter, right? Unlike our previous example with the hotels, right? That means those samples were dependent because if a Holiday Inn is $99, does that mean the hotel next to it will also be comparable in price? Probably. So unlike the traditional quarter, if I had a traditional quarter next to a state quarter, would those be the same? No. So these samples are independent. And we could make a reason because state quarters. Okay,